Players in the 2026 class joins us live to drop his Final Four. Find out if your favorite school is close to landing Bralan Womack. And Ohio State lost its defensive coordinator to a fellow Big Ten foe, but is their replacement proof that they won the breakup? And with him, can the Buckeyes repeat as national champs? And speaking of coaches, we're giving out grades to first-year guys, Sherrone, Curt, Cignetti, Kalen, DeBoer, and more. Plus, will Bryce Underwood be Michigan's starting quarterback, and will the Big Ten be better than the SEC again? The Ultimate College Football Show starts right now. Welcome into the Ultimate College Football Show. He is Smoke Dixon. I am Emily Proud, and we have so much to get to on today's show. But I just want to start off by asking you about, I guess, the news of the day. Matt Patricia is set to become the new defensive coordinator at Ohio State. Former Lions head coach, former defensive coordinator with the Patriots for many years. This is an NFL guy. He's coming to college. You did kind of a similar move back in your day, Smoke. What do you think of this?
Well, you know, I got the pencil in my ear. It's a pen, but I got my pencil. But
just like your guy, Matt Patricia.
When you look at it, this might be the new wave. We saw Wink Martindale go to Michigan last year and had some success, and Matty P coming over to Ohio State. You might have polar opposite of coaches that just left with Coach Knowles, which is known as a player's coach, a guy that will rally the crew, and players really love playing for him. That's almost somewhat of the opposite of what Matty P's been known for. When he was in Detroit, he got let out of there, and those guys kind of ran him out of there just because he lacked the ability to communicate to the younger players. So it'll be interesting.
Will be interesting to find out what happens there. But we're going to bring on our friend Matt Zenitz in just a little bit to discuss how this all came about. But first, we want to show you this tweet from our other friend. We got lots of friends here on the show today. Brandon Marcello tweeting, "Is spring football dead?" CBS Sports has learned that college coaches are considering NFL-style OTAs as a replacement for spring games amid roster tampering and injury concerns. Let's bring on Brandon Marcello himself, because I gotta get a little bit more perspective on this, Brandon. What are you hearing as far as the changes that could come to spring football?
Well, FBS head coaches met in January at their annual convention and voted on just one thing, and that one thing was we want only one transfer portal window. Right now, it's December and April, as we know. But also in those conversations, the idea popped up of, should we even have spring football? Should we maybe move to a more NFL type of outfit here where we're having OTAs, where we have maybe 15 days in the month of June and July, or maybe even a 30-day period of football activity starting in the spring semester going all the way through June for schools to figure out what they should do with those days. But the idea there is to not have spring games anymore. Why is that? Well, there's several reasons. One, as you guys have heard here just in this past week, Nebraska coach Matt Rule worried about roster tampering. Their game being on TV in the spring, that draws a lot of eyes and a lot of coaches maybe wanting to call up players illegally and recruit them because they've seen them on TV and how they perform in the spring. Also, we got to consider the calendar here. One, the roster's not complete in April or even March specifically for these teams. They got to go to the portal to get players. They've got high school players that aren't yet on campus for the most part. So the roster they have together, say in March or April, is sometimes nowhere in replication of what they're going to be in August for preseason camp. And also, you got to consider the physical toll on these players. The season now ending later and later, now mid-January, obviously, for these national championship teams. Do we want to be able to have to turn them around in 2 months or less and have them go through all these strenuous spring practices and then, of course, have a spring game? You know, being tired and being not someone that's not able to rest and recover your body, that leads to more injuries. And so there's a lot of things here that coaches are considering, but it's very interesting to me that in a formal atmosphere back in January at their voting meeting, they decided, hey, we need to discuss this. And a lot of these coaches want to just completely do away with spring practices for a lot of reasons. And we'll see here in the next few months whether this actually gains more traction in those closed meeting rooms.
Yeah, well, I'm with these coaches and getting rid of this whole entire spring ball look. Because last year, the winning team played 16 games. That's an NFL season. And you're getting that beaten up body just every single week you're going out there. Why do you now have to put in 15 practices to go out there to prove that I can play? And most of those guys that you have on the roster during the spring, maybe 20% of them aren't going to be with you for the calendar year. So when I sat down, I spoke to some of the head coaches about want to have an OTA atmosphere to it in a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3. And those processes are ramped up week to week without the physical battering of your body. They were all about it because your roster does not have the 105 or even the 110 that you usually have to go through a spring practice, because most of those guys might even thinking about getting into the portal. And now when you think about it, your team is not that deep anymore. So you're considering depth. I don't have a 3 deep to go through this spring practice and have a 3-on-3 look. I mean, 1s versus 1s, 2s versus 2s, 3 versus 3s anymore, because I don't have those bodies. And what Matt Rule is talking about, poaching from the spring game, yeah, I've never watched a spring game and try to poach anybody. That might be just trying to get out of it, but I'm not looking at your third team players at a spring game and evaluating them. I should have already done that during the season. So that's the only one that I debunked. But the process of doing it and the reasoning of health care for the players and just time on task with the players, yeah, I'm all about it.
Yeah, it certainly makes a lot of sense and is something that the coaches want to have happen. And you said it, Marcelo, it's just a proposal at this point. So what is the likelihood that this is something that we see starting this spring, or is this a future problem?
That's a future problem. I mean, something that wouldn't come until as early as 2026. And even so, there's a lot to consider here. You know, just because the coaches are discussing it, maybe even if they do put a proposal together, doesn't mean it's going to get passed. As we've seen, they want to cut the transfer portal windows down to one 10-day window in January, and they voted unanimously to do that. But now it's got to go through 2 more boards through the NCAA, and rarely do they see eye to eye with the coaches, and they end up having to compromise, and at some point there's some type of legislation, if any. So when we discuss going to an OTA type format, I think that's something that probably in some way, some form have to happen, because as we get into this revenue sharing era starting in July, at some point there's going to be not a union or a players organization of some sort where the players are going to have a voice at the table. And at some point, player health and safety, as Smoke was discussing there, is going to come up. Our bodies are going through 16 games throughout the season now, and then you're asking us to go through spring practices when our entire roster's not on campus. So you're asking me to practice even more just a couple years after a strenuous activity there, and then you're asking me to come back on campus in July, June to work through workouts. It's something to really discuss and look at. The big question I have, though, and I don't think the coaches realize this, is that how this might alienate the fans. You know, a lot of fans utilize spring practices and spring games as an opportunity to go to campus and watch and get a sneak peek of their teams they don't get during the regular season. A lot of fans just can't afford to travel to a stadium, spend almost $1,000 on tickets and travel. Some of them go to these games, these spring games that are free or have very little expense so they can see it. And now you're going to take that away from them. And meanwhile, you're asking fans to pay even more for tickets now that have talent fees attached to them to help pay players. They're driving fans a little bit further and further away, almost testing them like, hey, keep paying us money and we'll keep taking it from you, but we're going to take other things away from you. At some point, they got to consider how this might affect fans down the road.
Yeah, regardless of how the NCAA looks at this, there's a lot of coaches that's going to this, regardless, period. Yeah. And the spring game is going to be a simulated practice because they're worried about their better players getting hurt and not being able to replace them with the same type of talent.
Yeah, and if they're trying to model it after what we see in the NFL with OTAs, I've seen some bleachers at some of those practices. They can invite fans to come watch some of those open practices. So certainly a lot to consider there. Brandon, Marcelo, thank you for hopping on and giving us a preview of what you can read, a full story that is on CBSSports.com right now, talking about what the future of spring practices could be in college football. Go check that out now on CBSSports.com. Let's welcome on Matt Zenitz here to talk a little bit more about the news that we discussed at the beginning of the show with Matt Patricia likely becoming the next defensive coordinator at Ohio State. Matt, you've been on this from really the very beginning. You're kind of the first person that I saw to throw this on the timeline and talk about this as something that could potentially happen. Looks like it is. So what are you hearing?
Well, first of all, I feel like during the course of the last couple of months that all we've talked about is, or I shouldn't say all we've talked about, but I spent a tremendous amount of time talking about guys with ties to the New England Patriots organization, from Tom Brady and his FaceTime calls with guys like Bryce Underwood and John Mateer, to the Belichick family as a whole being in North Carolina, and now Matt Patricia being set to be the new defensive coordinator at Ohio State. But this one had picked up steam really in the last couple of days. So for Ohio State, they had gone through a process of vetting several people as potential replacements for Jim Knowles, including at least a few with NFL ties. One of them, Joe Cullen, the defensive line coach with the Kansas City Chiefs, had come up previously as a name on the radar, just like he had last year for the Michigan DC opening before he decided to stay put in Kansas City. And then the last couple of days, it progressively built up on my end, just in terms of Matt Patricia being a name to keep an eye on. And it reached a point earlier this week that Matt, along with his wife, took a trip to Columbus, met with Ohio State in person, and then these last couple of days, they continued to work in direction of just him ending up at Ohio State, and now it's on the verge of being finalized for him to be the new defense coordinator there for Ryan Day.
Matt, one of the most interesting moves happened over the weekend when running back coach from Penn State, Seider, left and went to Notre Dame to become the running back coach. In my opinion, a lateral move. But you found that to be one of the most surprising hires of this coaching cycle. Why?
Just because J1 is somebody who has been one of the most highly regarded assistants at the college level for an extended period of time, has been on the radar for head coaching opportunities during the course of the last couple of years, and really the consensus opinion among coaches in relation to him and next step coming out of Penn State was that it would probably be a head coaching opportunity that he would be leaving for. So to see him move on for another running backs coach job is something that caught me off guard and caught a lot of people around the coaching world off guard. But at the same time, somebody who's done tremendous work at Penn State, just had 2,000-yard rushers this season with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, and a significant win for Marcus Freeman to be able to get him there to Notre Dame.
You joked that we've been talking a lot about coaches with Patriots ties, but we've been talking a lot about coaches in general right now. It feels like every day we're getting new news about a coordinator hire or a new position coach hire. Why do you think there's so much movement this time of year right now in February?
Comes with the territory. So last year, for example, there was still coaching stuff, including at some prominent schools, that was going on until as late as the latter portion of March 29th. I can remember it said something notable happening that day last year. So it just comes along with the transactional cycle, and still have, even though it can now cross the Ohio State DC search off the list, still some other notable openings remaining, including Penn State trying to find J1 Seider's replacement. There have wide receivers coach opening in Oregon, and some other notable things to go along with that from a coaching standpoint. And then some significant openings as far as college front office opportunities to go along with that, including the GM spot at Notre Dame and the GM position at Oklahoma also.
Oh, and it's time to answer those questions. We know who to call. Matt Zenitz, thank you so much for being here. And as we're talking about coaches, let's remind you of some of the first-year head coaches from last year. The carousel was pretty crazy last year. A little bit quieter, I would say, this year. So we're actually going to grade the first-year head coaches from this past season. These are the guys we're going to grade. We've got first-time head coaches and coaches who are new to their programs in the Power Four. But Smoke's not the only one doing this exercise, so let's bring on Brad Crawford to help us give some grades to some first-year head coaches. Let's start with the guys who are stepping into the role for the very first time. Sherrone Moore, 8-5 season, end of the year on a 3-game win streak, including wins over Ohio State and Alabama. So I'd say the mood is pretty high in Ann Arbor right now. What's his grade?
Yeah, I gave Sherrone Moore a overall B, maybe even a B+. Emily, how many coaches in America can say that they beat Southern Cal, Ohio State, and Alabama last season? The answer is one. It's Sherrone Moore. He was able to accomplish this despite the NCAA cloud post-Jim Harbaugh sort of hanging over the program, coming off that national championship, and he had no quarterback and no offense the entire season. Look, I know 5 losses is more than anybody expected after that 15-0, but Michigan was able to beat a Buckeyes team that went on to run roughshod through the expanded playoff and win the championship. Michigan still has those bragging rights in that rivalry 4 consecutive years, and it did not change despite the coaching transition. So to me, Sherrone Moore aced his final exam during rivalry weekend, and he got some extra credit for beating Alabama in that bowl game. So he went from a satisfactory grade to a B for me.
Certainly. I don't know if Michigan fans were expecting them to win the national championship, but beating Ohio State, yeah, that feels like a successful season for them. Elsewhere in the Big Ten, it still feels weird to say that when I talk about UCLA, but DeShaun Foster, 5-7 in year 1. Smoke, what grade do you give him?
Well, I'm going to give old Smoke a C, and that's not this Smoke. That's the head coach's Smoke. And the reason why I gave him a C is just coming over and just taking over that Chip Kelly roster was depleted. And he did a really good job of just getting that program going in the right direction. But I had to give him a C just because that first hire of the coordinator with Eric Bieniemy, he struggled with. Bieniemy wanted to implement the West Coast offense, and they struggled with that. They were up and down. They lost 5 games in a row, came back and went on a 3-game winning streak. But when I look at coaches and first-year guys, whenever you have a 1-score game, I put that on the coaches. And that you have to get through those games by pulling that right string and just making maybe 1 or 2 calls to get that going. And when you looked at the Minnesota game, the SC game, I put that on Coach Foster. And I would have gave him a B if they would have won those 2 games and got to 7. And I thought that was the reason why I gave him a C.
I love it. Smoke showing his work with the grade, too, so we get a little backstory here. Brad, let's go to the SEC. Mississippi State's Jeff Lebby, 2-10 in his first season. Winless in the SEC. What's the grade?
Yeah, when you go 0-8 in conference play, you're not going to get a passing grade from me. I don't think anybody can. But I will say this. Mississippi State was competitive in a ton of games and only lost by 17 combined points to the Big 12 champion Arizona State, who made the playoff, and SEC champion Georgia. They scored 31 points between the hedges, lost that game 41-31. So there was no quit in this team. That's saying something despite that 2-10 record. Blake Shapen, quarterback, is back for another year as a senior next fall. I think in year 2 in this offensive system, that should help the passing game improve. The big thing for me with Jeff Lebby is, can he fix the defensive issues at Mississippi State? They have not had dogs on that side of the football the last couple of years in Starkville, and to be better in the SEC, MSU has to get better on defense.
We know they've had them in the past, too. We've seen it before, so we can see it again. Smoke, how about in the ACC? We've got Syracuse's Fran Brown, 10 wins in year 1 at Syracuse. What grade do you give him?
Oh, that's an easy one. A.
Love it.
Coach came in spanking with an A. And when you get an A, you have to do one thing. You got to find your quarterback. And they did with Kyle McCord. Brought him in, he had the best year of his career. And then they went down and got Fidel Diggs on the defensive side to come with him from Texas A&M, which he brought in with the defensive coordinator. But he knew him from when he recruited that guy out of the great state of New Jersey. So when you have a coach that can win 10 games, bring back that energy back into the dome, in the Orange Dome, and Coach Sweeney says, thank you again for getting that monster win to get him in the playoffs. But recruiting, energy, focus, attention to detail, players, why can't I get an A to that guy? He deserves it.
Yeah, let's keep the good times rolling here and move to guys who have been head coaches before but were in the first year in their programs with Indiana's Curt Cignetti. They made it to the playoffs. Need I say more, Brad? What grade do you give him?
Yeah, he just managed the best season in program history, so anything less than an A here would just, be bad on my part. And he did so by implementing his philosophy quickly. Indiana's not used to winning 11 games, but they did so in year 1 under Curt Cignetti. The only teams the Hoosiers lost to this season both played in the national championship game. Notre Dame on the road, and they lost to Ohio State in a game that was more competitive than the final score indicated. I don't care how easy this schedule was, and I know by Big Ten standards it was favorable. Indiana took full advantage of that. Curt Cignetti, basically with a transfer portal-laden roster. And, oh, by the way, he signed Cal transfer quarterback Francisco Mendoza for 2025. as the replacement for Curtis Work. So I don't think Cignetti is going to slow down anytime soon in Bloomington.
All right. Good year one. Could also maybe be a nice follow-up in year two. Smoke, Mike Elko at Texas A&M was a win away from the SEC championship in year one. So how do you grade his first season?
So just one win away, you know what, Coach? I gave you that grand old B. Because if you would have went into that SEC championship, I would have gave you an A. But this is what you found in year one for yourself. Franchise quarterback in Marcel Reed. Marcel Reed gave you that opportunity now to say, you know what? Guys in the transfer portal, especially receivers, you have somebody to come play for. And what he also did was stabilize that program that was left by Jimbo Fisher for dead. Brought that program back. You saw guys playing with energy, tenacity, attention to detail. They struggled a little bit in the back end, but he's fixing that. So when you have a top 10 recruiting class coming in a portal and in high school, listen, good things are coming. And the ball is getting ready to roll to Texas A&M.
Yeah, you mentioned receivers wanting to come in and play with Marcel Reed. That's certainly the case. We saw the absolute haul that the Aggies brought in the transfer portal at the receiver position. Brad, let's stick in the SEC here. Kalen DeBoer, I mean, obviously had some, I say, massive shoes to fill at Alabama, is putting it mildly. So what do you grade his 9-4 campaign?
At Alabama, 9 wins is not going to cut it. He gets a C for me. Look, it was smooth sailing for Kalen DeBoer after that win over Georgia in September. All of us, myself included, kind of thought Bama would be a playoff team after starting the season 3-0 with that win. And then the season derailed a bit. They went to Nashville and lost to Vanderbilt. Alabama football does not lose to Vanderbilt. And that game revealed a ton of issues defensively. And then later in the season against Oklahoma, that did not look like Alabama. A 3-touchdown loss took Bama from playoff contention to the outside looking in. And then came the flat bowl performance against Michigan, and that results in a 4-loss team. So Nick Saban lost 4 games one time in 17 years in Tuscaloosa, and that came in year one in 2007. I'm not comparing DeBoer to Nick Saban and his greatness as a college football coaching legend, but expectations have not changed, and DeBoer cannot afford another satisfactory C grade in 2025.
Kind of sounds like you are. He's doing I'm just kidding. He's doing the same thing that Nick Saban did, right? Is lower those expectations in year one and then go on to become the greatest college football coach of all time. Smoke, let's end here with the Arizona's Brent Brennan. Other big shoes to fill, too. I mean, he took over a 10-win team, only 4 wins for the Wildcats this past season. What's his grade?
I guess I got to end it on a sad note. D. Closest thing to failure that you can possibly get for simply just having 2 NFL-type players with Noah Fafita and T-Mac, the receiver position. When you have that on offense, that's a 6 wins for you. And when you're playing in the Big 12 and you're getting blown out with games of 49-7 by Arizona State, 56-12 to UCF, TCU beat you 28-49, like the morale level is low. And when you cut on the tape, you don't see that same intensity that they're playing with. So in order to get a C, your team got to play hard. That's just showing up and playing football. And I didn't see that on film when I watched Arizona.
All right, so let's take a look at the final report cards from our guys here. As we heard, Brad is really impressed with what Sherrone Moore did. Curt Cignetti also in year one, but not so much with Jeff Lebby and Kalen DeBoer. That I guess passing C grade there for him, but still some room for improvement. As for Smoke, it's an A for Fran Brown, a B for Mike Elko, and a C for DeShaun Foster, and a D for Brent Brennan. You just used all the letters that were available to you, Smoke. I do appreciate that. Before we let you go, though, Brad, I want to ask, just in general, looking at all of these coaches, and we want to look ahead, right? We graded them, but now we're looking ahead. So which coach do you think makes the biggest leap in year 2 of this group?
Yeah, I'm going Sherrone Moore. When you sign the top quarterback in the country, #1 overall recruit for 2025 in Bryce Underwood, as long as he's the real deal as a true freshman, and there's some spark offensively, because last season Michigan won 7 games and beat 4 ranked teams despite not having any athlete at the quarterback position. If Bryce Underwood is legit, I think Michigan could challenge for 9 or 10 wins, and I fully expect, Emily, for the Big Ten to be a 4 playoff team league once again.
Well, Coach Elko, the pressure's on you. The smoke press is on your back. I think that you have the perfect opportunity to make this jump. Looking at your schedule for next year, the 2025 schedule, you have an opportunity to go into that Texas game, end of the season, 10-1. You have a top 10 recruiting class coming out of high school, top 10 in the portal. Marcel Reed has pieces around him to explode in the passing game. Put up a lot of points. You're a defensive guy. Let's go to work and represent the SEC and get to this college football playoffs.
I love it. What's the saying? First is the worst. Second is the best. So for those two coaches, hoping year 2 is the time to shine. Brad, thank you so much for being here. Smoke, appreciate you giving us some grades. You can check out more of Brad Crawford's work at 247sports.com. He will look into all of these fun off-season questions that we've got to hold us over for the next few months, getting ready for the next season. You can check out all of his work at 247sports.com.
I mean, he's the guy that can get them back to the national title game, right? I always compare him to Vince Young. He's someone that can beat you with his arm. He can beat you with his legs. Bryce Underwood is just as prepared to play as a true freshman as Dylan Raiola was, as DJ Lagway was at Florida. So we'll see. Maybe it's a 2-quarterback system from the jump. But I think by the time we get to the end of the season and that big rivalry game against the team that just won a national championship, I fully expect Bryce Underwood to be taking a bulk of the snaps because he is the future there at Michigan.
Certainly expect Bryce Underwood to be making a huge impact in year 1. So let's talk all-impact team, courtesy of our friend Chris Hummer. And, of course, Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins has got to be part of this conversation to remind us what made these guys great prospects. And let's talk with the one that we led this segment with, Bryce Underwood, number 1 guy, number 1 quarterback. So, Chris, what do you expect him to do for Michigan immediately?
Play. I expect him to play. Michigan desperately needs an upgrade at quarterback. Obviously, they added Mikey Keene out of the transfer portal, coming over from Fresno State. He's somebody who's played a lot of ball, but I'd consider Mikey Keene the bar that Bryce Underwood has to clear to play in year 1. Maybe it won't be week 1, but by the end of the year, I fully expect Bryce Underwood to be on the field. The early returns for him after he enrolled early were very strong. Coming out of Michigan. And this is somebody that Michigan has built their program around, like a historic investment from an NIL standpoint. They did not bring him there to sit on the bench throughout year 1. We saw this last year with Dylan Raiola, with Nebraska making a similar investment in him and their program. And this is the guy Sherrone Moore's future is built around. I fully expect him to get on the field at some point, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was early in the year.
And Chris, much like Dylan Raiola, Bryce Underwood comes to Ann Arbor with a ton of experience, started 54 games over the past 4 years there outside of Detroit. I also think what's similar about those two is the frame. We all saw those photos of Bryce Underwood from the bowl practices. Yeah, he's legitimately 6'3", pushing 6'4", 220 pounds. He can do a running backflip. And what I think really stands out about Bryce Underwood as a senior, aside from his ability to beat defenses with his legs, is it felt like the game slowed down for him. He was much more confident with his decisions. So that athleticism, the IQ, how he's seeing the field, I agree with you. I fully expect him to be a part of Michigan's offense very early there in 2025. And you think about it, the Wolverines 113th nationally last season when it came to that passing attack. They have to get better. Bryce Underwood is the quarterback of the future.
All right, elsewhere we got Clemson running back Gideon Davidson. He is the number 5 running back, but given the hole at that position, Chris, why do you think that he will make an immediate impact for the Tigers?
He almost has to. He's going to be basically one of 2 healthy running backs going into spring ball for Clemson. They obviously lose their top back from last year and Phil Maffa to the NFL. His backup from last season, Jay Haynes, tore his ACL late in the season. He's not going to be ready for spring and is probably going to be questionable heading into the 2025 season anyway, given the recovery timeline there. And Gideon Davidson's just somebody that's going to have to play for them. He'll be competing with Keith Adams for starting level reps in the spring. And given that this is a guy who was the Max Preps National Junior Player of the Year in 2023, he comes into college with huge expectations and a skill set that can get him on the field right away. And I think one thing about Clemson is we talk about their misuse of the portal or their philosophy of not going into the portal very often. But one thing that leads to is true freshmen play a ton at Clemson. They've had multiple true freshman All-Americans the last couple of years simply because those guys get on the field sooner than other teams. And I expect Gideon Davidson to be the next guy in that line.
Chris, I think you could have put anyone from Clemson's recruiting class on this list because you're right. Like those dudes are part of the 2 deep. and they're called upon really early. Gideon Davidson, we say it all the time, running back is the easiest position for true freshmen to get on the field. I mean, look around the country, guys are making an impact in year one. And to me, Gideon Davidson, he's got a little bit more juice than Phil Moffa. And that might be saying a lot. Phil Moffa is going to play on Sundays, but he's a guy that has 3-down potential. I thought as a senior, he banged between the tackles, but he was creative at the second level when he broke into space. What also stands out about Gideon Davidson and him being on this list, Gideon Davidson was committed to play in the Navy All-American Bowl for years, right? And then at the last second, Clemson's like, hey, we need him in bowl practices. So I fully expect him to be part of the plans there. And then you also can't forget about his running mate in the backfield, Marquise Davidson, another top 247 running back headed to Clemson. He's more of the exterior perimeter playmaker, has the speed to beat defenders. I think Clemson, it might not be 2025, but this backfield could look like a lot like Ohio State's from this past season, where Gideon Davidson is kind of your Quinshon Judkins in between the tackles, every down guy. And then Marquise Henderson, he could be like Travion Henderson and provide some excitement.
You've provided some excitement for Clemson fans with that comparison there. How about Oregon wide receiver DeCorian Moore? He's our number one wide receiver in the class. But, Chris, why is he going to be asked to participate and to make an impact this fall?
Well, I mean, I don't cover high school like Andrew does, but I text with a lot of people around college football. And the sentiment with DeCorian Moore is he was number one in this class, and it wasn't close at receiver. He is a special type of talent coming out of Duncanville High School. He obviously had a great quarterback in Keelan Russell in high school, but he created a lot of that separation on his own. And going into Oregon, a program that loses their top two receivers, his 10-4 speed is going to see the field very quickly. DeCorian Moore was one of the highest sought-after players in this class. He was one of the most expensive players in this class. He is somebody that's going into Eugene to play right away. And we've seen true freshman receivers have an impact right away. Look no further than like Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams this season. And I think DeCorian Moore has the kind of skill set to make that type of impact in year one.
You're right, Chris. We saw a ton of true freshman wide receivers. I'll say this, though. Dan Lanning, since he's been at Oregon, the Ducks have only started 2 true freshmen in 2 years. And both those guys played in the Fiesta Bowl because of opt-out. So DeCorian Moore would have to be bucking the trend. But if there's a guy to do it, it's DeCorian Moore. And throughout the evaluation process for us, I mean, he went wire to wire as a top 10 prospect, but size was kind of the sticking point. You see it 5'11", 185 pounds. He's not this big perimeter guy. Then we got him at the Polynesian Bowl. He had a walk-off touchdown where he outmuscled 2 defenders. He plays much bigger than the numbers suggest. And I think the other thing that separates DeCorian Moore from the rest of the pack is that competitive drive. This is a kid that hates to lose. 7-on-7, spring games. He wants to win. He's actually one of the few players that actually got snaps on both sides of the ball at Duncanville. He also played some corner at the Polynesian Bowl when they were down on defensive back. So I don't know if it's going to be a Jeremiah Smith type of junior season or freshman rookie season for DeCorian Moore. But, hey, remember Eric Singleton 2 years ago at Georgia Tech in the slot making explosive plays? I think DeCorian Moore could do the same thing for Oregon, which has plenty of questions at wide receiver, like Chris pointed out.
I hope that Ducks fans were listening closely. He said, I don't think it's going to be like Jeremiah Smith. As soon as you hear that guy's name, it definitely raises some alarm bells there, but expectations are high for him, certainly. Also, Michael Fasusi, the Oklahoma offensive lineman, they need him right away, Chris. So what can he do for them right away?
Play. I mean, I will say, like, I talked to Andrew about this before we published this piece. We put a lot of 5-star linemen on this list because those are the only linemen that tend to be ready to play. And Michael Fasusi still has some growing to do once he gets to campus. He's got all the athletic tools possible, but he's not as ready-made as maybe 1 or 2 other guys in this class that were on this list. But given Oklahoma's need at the position, they had one of the worst offensive lines in the Power 4 last year. Everybody talked about their lack of receiver health, but part of the problem for Jackson Arnold is he just couldn't stay up and stay healthy the whole year because of the people blocking in front of him. And Oklahoma did bring in help via the transfer portal. You would expect somebody like Logan Howland, who returns, and Derek Simmons coming over from Western Carolina to get the first crack as a starting offensive tackle. But Michael Fasusi is immediately the most talented offensive lineman in that room for Oklahoma. He's somebody they invested huge in to win over a recruiting battle with Texas and Texas A&M. And that's a guy who eventually has to play for Oklahoma. Maybe he doesn't start right away, but I'd expect him to be as part of the lineup eventually by the season's end.
You're right, Chris. I think he's got the highest ceiling of all those offensive linemen there in Norman. And, he's someone that's just dripping with upside. That's why he finished as our top-ranked offensive tackle in the year of the beef. And to be honest, I thought he was going to be a longer burn. This is a kid that has only been playing organized football for a few years. He grew up in Africa. Then we saw him at the Under Armour All-America game practices for that event. I thought he was excellent in the run game. Normally when you have these big freak athletes, they're better in pass sets than run sets. That's not the case with Michael Fasusi, and I think that is extremely encouraging. He also looked good on the corner out there in Hawaii at the Polynesian Bowl, and Chris hit it right on the head. These offensive linemen these days, these 5-stars, it's like an NFL team drafting a tackle in the first round. The expectation is you better be able to contribute right away, given the investment, given where we are with player compensation. These guys got to be ready to go. It used to be, hey, we'll put him on ice, we'll see him in a few years. That is no longer the case. Caden Proctor at Alabama 2 years ago. Same with Francis Noah at Miami. Jordan Seaton this past year at Colorado. There's going to be some lumps, but usually it's for the good, for the long haul there.
He called it the year of the beef on the offensive line. How about on the defensive line? Texas defensive lineman Justice Terry, number 3 in that position in the class. And I know a lot of open spots on that Texas front this offseason. A lot of outgoing talent to the NFL. So, Chris, why do you think that he will fill a need there?
To the NFL and the portal. Basically, every single contributing scholarship defensive tackle that Texas had this season is gone. Literally everyone to the NFL or to the portal. So, they have to rework that defensive line on the fly. They did that somewhat in the transfer portal, bringing in 2 likely starters from North Carolina and Purdue. But Justice Terry is somebody that Steve Sarkisian has already called the future of the defensive line room. He is as athletic as they come at that position. He is somebody that is ready to play physically, even though I fully expect him to put on a lot more weight once he arrives in Austin. Justice Terry is just somebody that Texas looks as a 2-deep contributor for next year. It's really hard to get on the field as a true freshman defensive tackle. Very few of them are able to do it just because of the strength and the weight that you have to gain in college to step in right away. But Justice Terry is just somebody with the athletic profile and the path to the field that we fully expect him to see the field right away in 2025.
Well, he's an interesting one because he missed a ton of time as a senior with a knee injury. Like week 2, someone hit him right there in the leg with the helmet. So he missed time, battled to come back in the playoffs. Apparently showed up at Texas last month, right around 260 pounds. Now he's up to 275 pounds. I mean, the thing with Justice Terry is the good is really good, right? He can win with speed. He can win with power. I think he needs to kind of keep working on the technique. And if you're Texas, that's okay. With this, I think if we learned anything from this 12-team college football playoff, depth is king, especially at the point of attack. And, there was another former 5-star Bryce Young that came on really big down the stretch for Notre Dame in their playoff run. And if you think about it, if you're playing your 15th game of your freshman season, that's really like year 2 on campus, right? The 3rd game of your sophomore year. So, if you're Texas, I think the biggest thing is getting the body right for Justice Terry, adding some more moves to the pass rushing menu. And then you look, all right, maybe he can help us further down the line as a true freshman.
All right. Elsewhere on the defensive line, Mississippi State edge, Tyshawn Willis. He's the number 11 edge in this class. I think it's safe to say they need him, Chris. What makes you think he's ready to come in and make that immediate impact?
Well, there are 134 teams in the FBS. And Mississippi State finished 133rd last season in pressure rate. So Mississippi State needs all the help it can get off the edge. A stat that kind of stuck out to me is Willis had 18 sacks as a high school senior. A big caveat there, he's playing 1A Mississippi football, not the highest level of competition, which is part of the reason why there might be a bit of a development curve with him. But Mississippi State had 10 sacks all last season. Mississippi State just did not get pressure. And Willis is somebody who can step in right away as he grows and as he develops and just create pressure off the edge as a situational pass rusher. He brings that explosive ability. He can get after the quarterback, and that's what Mississippi State needs more than anything else. They went heavy in the portal at edge. They need all they can help they can get at that position, and Willis is somebody who can do that right away for Mississippi State.
Well, I love that you put him on here, Chris, because DeShaun is one of my darlings throughout the scouting process. He was my number 6 freak on the freaks list. I think a lot of people are like, who is this kid? Well, he was Mississippi's 1A Mr. Football there as a senior. You said the 18 sacks. How about the 21 offensive touchdowns? How about him returning punts at 240 pounds or whatever he is? Look, DeShaun Willis might not be the longest dude, but he's got a lethal first step, backs it up with all the testing metrics, all the data, all the multi-sport, everything you want to see. And you think about, okay, NFL draft coming up. Jalen Walker isn't the longest pass rusher, but a lot of teams are going to take him because he can get after the quarterback. Yeah, you're right. DeShaun Willis, he might not be an every down guy, but third and long, I could certainly see him on the field for the Bulldogs because he can come screaming around the corner.
Man, I don't know if he's going to be returning punts for Mississippi State next year, but I really want to see it. Andrew, before we let you go, I need to ask, because we're about to bring on the number 2 safety in the 2026 class in Bralan Womack. So real quick, what's the scouting report on him?
Well, I know he's number 2, but I think this might be the cleanest safety to come out of the high school ranks since Caleb Downs a few years ago. Bralan Womack, he checks off box after box. Gatorade Player of the Year there in Mississippi. Did it in all 3 phases of the game. Did it as a wide receiver, a return man, and then obviously at defensive back. He offers so much versatility. Yeah, he can defend the run, but his ability to play both zone and man coverage, it stands out. We got him at the Navy All-American Bowl. He was excellent all 3 days of practices. We hardly called his name in the game, and that's because he was in the right place at the right time. I think someone is getting one of the safest prospects in the class in Bralan Womack. And this is a dude that has a chance to be a trusted defender for a college football playoff contender that can not only make plays, but also clean up mistakes.
All right, we're about to hear his 4 finalists. So thank you so much for that scouting report. Chris Hummer, thank you for your list of the all-impact team. If you want to check out that full list, head to 247sports.com. Also, if you want more Andrew Ivins, you can check him out on the 105 podcast with Cooper Patagna. New episodes dropping every Wednesday. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts. Tom Loy is here in studio joining us as we're about to bring on Bralan Womack. You heard the scouting report. Sounds very reminiscent of what we talked about when we discussed Caleb Downs. We kept joking he's the safest safety that you could get in that class, and clearly that has turned out all right for him in college. But what has this process been like from, just all the recruitments and everything to get to this day for Bralan Womack?
It's pretty incredible, really. So I saw him for the first time live in Nashville at the Under Armour camp a year ago, and he's just a kid you gravitate toward. Incredibly smart, intelligent, and a tremendous, tremendous ball player. Then he shows up and has a great camp. Then he has a great junior season, culminates in San Antonio at the 2025 Navy All-American Bowl. And he more than held his own. I mean, he's playing against guys that are older than him, and yet he just flat out dominated. There was some 1-on-1 portions, 7-on-7, and obviously 11-on-11. Tremendous, tremendous talent, and one of my favorite prospects in the class. And I think that as you get around him, you get to know him, you are going to see that one lucky school is getting a big-time player, an elite talent, and a guy who's going to be a day-one difference maker.
Love to hear it. Can't wait to meet him myself. So let's go ahead and bring on the man of the hour, Bralan Womack, who is here to give us his top 4. Thank you so much for being here and for trusting us to help deliver the big news. Let's go ahead and just go through the list. I want to start with your first official visit, which is set for May 30th. You are headed to Florida. So tell us why the Gators are one of your finalists.
Just the recent year they just they had a freshman come in, DJ Lagway, lead them, on the back end schedule. They dominated. Just, some things they can fix next year going into the season, but, a lot of freshmen on the field. And recently they just brought in Coach Siri. Coach that was recently at Washington, played at Alabama, played New England, coached at New England. So, he's coached at every level, played at every level. So, they have what it takes.
And this is a school that I know you've had high interest in for a very long time. You are headed to Texas A&M on June 5th to hang out with Mike, Elko, and the guys. Why are the Aggies in play?
Just since day one, they, let me know I was priority to them. And, Coach Elko being a safety coach in his recent years at Duke, being able to come in and do what he did last year, like they said, one win away from the SEC championship. It's some great achievements in the future for them.
All right, we got another SEC school to add to your list. On June 13th, you'll be headed to Auburn. So tell us, why are the Tigers one of your lucky finalists?
A lot like Florida, they struggled a little bit last year, but a lot of freshmen. I saw the field, a lot of 2025 that are coming in that can make impacts early, and just being around Coach T.J. Rushing and Coach Durkins, they know what it's going to take to develop me and help me reach my standard, my excellence, and I feel like they have what it takes.
And this last one is going to come at very little surprise to anybody that's followed you closely, because I think back to last year when we met at that camp in Nashville, the one school you kept talking about over and over again, the Ohio State Buckeyes. You will see them on June 20th. Why is that your fourth and final official visit?
Like y'all said, coming out of high school, a lot of people compare me to Caleb Downs. That's a great comparison to be compared to, and looking at what they did for him this year, what they've done in recent years, with the DBs that they brought in and put in the league and kept in the league, it's not a doubt in my mind that I can go there and be developed and, get to NFL.
I love it. There you have the breaking news. Bralan Womack has officially set his Final Four. It will be Florida, Texas A&M, Auburn, and Ohio State. Bralan, before we let you go, I got one, big question for you. When do you expect to make your final decision?
I'm looking more towards the end of fall, like late November area. Once I finish up with my school, I want to take a couple, game day official visits, see the atmosphere. So it'll be towards the end of the season.
Got it. Well, best of luck with all your visits this summer. Thank you so much for joining us and allowing us to present your big news. Good luck with your decision.
Yes, ma'am. Thank y'all for having me.
I love it. So there you have it. Bralan Womack has officially set his finalists and his upcoming visits. He's got the Florida Gators on May 30th. Then he goes to Texas A&M, heads to Auburn after that, and Ohio State. A busy June for Bralan Womack, but that's what happens when you are the number 2 safety in the class. Hey, our team site reporters of each of these programs, they're going to make the case for why the school they cover could land this prospect. So let's kick it off with Blake Alderman and Florida.
It's big news for Florida to make the top 4 for top 50 safety Bralan Womack out of Mississippi. And I say it's big in the sense that Florida was not in his previously, unofficial top 4, if you will. It was a leaderboard that he was still sort of constructing. He takes a junior day visit to Florida there at the early part of February for a junior day, gets time around the coaching staff. It was his first time back on campus since coming out of his freshman year. And Florida's recent resurgence, if you will, in this recruitment is due to the recent addition of defensive coordinator, safeties coach Vinny Sinceri. The two have a really long-standing relationship from his time when he was at Washington. And Womack even told us after his junior day visit to Florida that Washington was going to make his top 5 whenever he made that unofficial list. But Sinceri left. Now he's at Florida. Florida has stepped into the mix. They're set to get him on campus for a shadow day visit where he'll follow a player around in the spring, an official visit. And now Florida can hopefully make a run and get a young guy on the roster on a position where they're pretty upperclassman heavy.
Texas A&M is off to a hot start in the 2026 cycle, but boy, would they love to add Bralan Womack to the fold, a dynamic player that was one of the top performers at the All-American Bowl, despite only being a junior, but he put his talents on display. We know how Mike Elko feels as a defensive head coach and a guy that's worked with safeties in the past, how important that position is to his defense. And it's hard to imagine a better fit in this cycle than Bralan Womack, who is fantastic in the slot, can work as a deep safety, and can also thrive in one-on-one coverage. Mike Elko and his staff have got a top 10 class right now. Bralan Womack looks like he'd be the perfect fit to help continue building momentum for Mike Elko and his staff.
The recruitment of Bralan Womack is new safeties coach TJ Rushing real first opportunity to make a mark at Auburn. Working as an off-field staffer last year under DJ Durkin, Charles Kelly leaves to take the Jacksonville State head coaching job. Charles Kelly, regarded as one of the best recruiters in the country. TJ Rushing is no slouch, but this is a great opportunity for him to make his mark And no better opportunity than Bralan Womack, the number 2 safety in the country. And he's got some good opportunities there as well with Bralan. Bralan's sister on the Auburn softball team currently. So there's that connection there. Ever since Auburn offered in January, he visited for junior day, quickly built up that strong connection. And the safety room is a spot where Auburn continues to need to add layered depth to that room. And that's exactly what Auburn is looking to do with Bralan Womack.
Highly regarded safety, Bralan Womack would be a huge addition for Ohio State's 2026 recruiting class. And the Buckeyes have already made Womack a priority in that class. He was first offered a scholarship after his impressive performance at Ohio State's one-day camp in June, where he showed off all of the tools that make him one of the top safeties in the country. Ohio State then paid a visit with head coach Ryan Day to Womack just after winning the 2024 national championship, showcasing what a priority he is. The expectation is that Womack could come in and fill the safety spot vacated potentially by Caleb Downs after the 2025 season and help the Buckeyes secondary for the next 3 to 4 years.
All right, for more on Bralan Womack's recruitment and all the very latest in recruiting and off-season happenings, you can check out these great team sites. We got Swamp 24/7, Gig'em 24/7, Auburn Undercover, and Bucknuts.com. It is time now for some ultimate burning questions. Smoke Dixon back in studio here with Tom Loy. And I feel like you guys are on the hot seat. Pun absolutely intended there. And I'm going to ask you some questions here. First one being, can Ohio State repeat as national champions? Smoke, take this one first.
No shot. You can't lose your offensive coordinator and your defensive coordinator. And the guy that's coming in has one of the most complicated defenses to fit in through spring, get rolling, and beat the team that's on your schedule. Nah.
No shot? What do you say?
I think they got more than a shot, especially if Julian's saying if he wins a job and he's everything that I expect him to be coming out of high school, I think he can absolutely take them back to the promised land. You got Jeremiah Smith returning, Carnell Tate, you got Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles. The team may not be as loaded as it was last year, but I think they got enough firepower. And again, I think it all revolves around the arm of a guy who I think is a special, special talent in Julian Sayin.
Such a you guys answering those questions. Worried about coaching, worried about players.
Sense.
They've got talent there. Our next burning question is Carson Beck good enough to take Miami to the college football playoff, Tom?
I'm going to say he's good enough to take them back there. I do not expect them to be in the playoff. I do believe that he's talented enough, and I think he's going to have a solid season. I just don't think that there's enough weapons, like I was just talking about Ohio State. I don't think there's enough weapons around him to really get them over the hump and really truly compete for a national title.
Yeah, good enough because he's an NFL caliber quarterback. But my problem is Mario Cristobal. You just had maybe the top player in this NFL draft right now, and he played Superman for you last year, and you couldn't get in the college football playoffs. So I'm going to say good enough, yes, as a player. Program, no. Sorry. No bueno.
We agree. Look at that.
Love it. See, we all come together. Let's see about this final one here. Big Ten has won back-to-back national championships. So I'm curious, will the Big Ten be better than the SEC again in 2025, Smoke?
Yes. I think we've seen the end of the SEC just running college football. The way the college football is being played in the last 12 years, the SEC had the right formula. They had the most talent, stacked, 3 deeps at every position. And the Big Ten, all they've ever done is just play with less and have a better opportunity. So evolving to the way that college football is right now, the Big Ten has always done it at a higher level. So now this is their new norm. They don't have to wait and have 3 deep and have number 1 recruiting classes back to back to back and NFL players littered across the board in order to win national championships.
So I love Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State for the Big Ten. And then I love Texas, Georgia, and LSU in the SEC. But I feel like after that, I'm leaning towards the Big Ten when you got Michigan and Illinois slightly ahead of the likes of like Tennessee and LSU. So I kind of agree. I think it's going to be the Big Ten's year. I think they're going to be back in the mix. And again, that's kind of why I'm leaning towards Ohio State being able to get back to the national championship. I think they have a real good shot to run the table once again. But I think big picture, it's the Big Ten for me.
Well, we got a big Buckeyes fan here. The Big Ten reign continues per Smoke and Tom. Those are the ultimate burning questions. You want more of those? Well, you should watch the Ultimate College Football Show, which you can see right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel for more off-season content. And tune in to the Ultimate College Football Show on Mondays and Wednesdays at 4 Eastern. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week.